Mr. Luxon, right now, at this moment,
you've got to call me Chris.
Our listeners of Apna 990 radio consist most of dairy shop owners, as this is their favorite radio in New Zealand. And Mr. Luxon, they are anxiously waiting to hear your vision on tackling crimes against dairy shop owners and growing gang problem.
Yeah, well, listen, first and foremost, I've met with Sonny Kushal many times. I think he's doing a great job advocating for the Dairy and Business Owners Group. And some of the stories are incredibly heartbreaking of people being violently assaulted, but also often ram-raided or broken into, 2, 3, 4 times. For us, we just feel the government's been really soft on crime. We think actually we want people to know we're on the side of backing police. We want the gangs to know that it's going to get much tougher under a national government. We want the public to know that we care about them because they're victims of this crime that's been rising. And we've seen the 23 shootings in a 2-week period. We've seen a 21% increase in violent crime. We've seen a 45% growth in gangs. So there's no doubt about it that crime is rising, and we need to be able to give police new tools to be able to crack down on that crime. And that's why, and the simple story is that a lot of it is emanating from gangs and making a gang life attractive even to young people as well. And so really the deal is that there are rights and responsibilities in New Zealand as citizens, and gangs want the rights, but they don't want the responsibilities. And so that's why Mark Mitchell and I have put together 4 new powers that we want the police to be able to crack down on gangs, because our job has to be to disrupt and dismantle gangs and to be able to frustrate them. And really we think the police need more powers given the situation that they're encountering with rising crime.
Yes, sure. Mr. Luxon will go into more detail in a moment. So, Mr. Luxon, why there is so much desperation amongst the gangs and criminals to execute such ram raids, robberies, which has resulted in such a low business confidence, amongst retailers especially?
Yeah, well, there's low business confidence and there's low actual consumer confidence because of the way the economy's being poorly managed by the government at the moment. Where they're just not managing inflation and the rising costs of things. And many of your listeners will be dealing with that as they have to pay higher prices from the suppliers that are providing products into their stores as well. But with respect to gangs, it's time that we really do crack down on that. And there's a lot of learning that we've got out of Western Australia, out of Queensland, out of New South Wales, where they've implemented some of these powers. And it's actually been a Labor government that's done it in many of those states, often with the support of a Liberal government or equivalent to a National Party. And they've actually, both parties have decided to do it together because they see the threat of gangs. And so that's why we think, we should be able to go off and make sure we can ban gang insignia in public places, because we know what that means and what that does. We want to be able to stop gang members gathering in public. We want to stop gang offenders associating with each other. And we want to stop gang members having access to guns, which is a major issue. And so there's some detail in each of those powers that we need to be able to get together.
Yeah, of course. But the listeners want to know why there is an eruption. There's an eruption on sudden desperation amongst the gangs.
Oh, well, because we've had basically gangs turn into very strong organised crime units, and they really are fighting it out for dominance amongst each other around drugs and crime in general and the proceeds of crime. And really that's what's been happening. We've had just rising, we've had more young people joining gangs as a consequence. They're up 45%. They're actually recruiting 3 times faster than the police. There's, I think, about 8,000 gang members. There's 10,000 police officers. So, the gang life has looked very attractive to young people to come and join because they look like they're getting all the money and they've got lots of proceeds from crime, which looks very attractive to young people in different parts of New Zealand who often are poor and are doing it tough. And so, that's why we've got to crack down on gangs really hard and be tough on crime. But we also have to start to work more about how we get kids into school so they're not being truant and they're not doing ram raids. Get kids into school and putting some services around those really tough families that actually stops making the gang life look an attractive proposition for people going forward. But right here, right now, we've got gang shootings and we've got rising gun crime. We really got to crack down on the crime part of it.
Mr. Luxon, you have just said a few moments ago that current government is soft on crime. When
Yes.
you yourself has also acknowledged that police force of 10,000 police officers is up against 8,000 gang members. Shouldn't we be sympathetic towards police where proportion of protecting 5 million Kiwis come to one police officer protecting 500 New Zealanders? As a comparison, USA has one police officer protecting 330 Americans.
Yeah, so we need to continue to put more resources into policing, and that means more police officers. It often means more investment. But the thing that we really need to do to make them even more effective is to give them more powers as well, because we can hire more police officers, but if they can't actually pursue fleeing drivers, which we've seen has been a problem with the change in the pursuit policy, if they actually can't crack down on gangs effectively and actually deal with the rising crime that they're seeing, that's a big problem too. So, no, we fully support more resourcing and more resources going into policing. But the real challenge is making sure we've got we've got more police powers coming to them as well so they can be even more effective. And I agree with you, our frontline police officers are magnificent. They're doing an incredible job, but they're very limited and they're doing it often with one hand behind their back because either they don't have the powers to actually push back against the gangs and against the ram raiders.
Yeah. Mr. Luxon...
a good example to me on the ram raiders would be we changed the pursuit policy, or the police changed the pursuit policy, or this government changed it. And the upshot of that is that we used to arrest 43% of fleeing drivers. Well, now we only arrest 17% of fleeing drivers. So the message very clearly is that you can get away with it. 87% of times a fleeing driver will never get arrested. So... that's the message that we send to the criminals is that, this government doesn't care about it. They're soft on it and you can get away with it. So that's unacceptable.
But Mr. Luxon, if National comes to power, do you want pursuit policy to be absolutely shunned, or National Party support chasing around of crimes with meager outcomes?
Yeah, so what we've said for some time now is that we really want to make sure we've got a review of that pursuit policy. And the police commissioner, after we've been talking about it for months now, he's actually said that they will go off and review that pursuit policy, which they, has obviously led to a lot less arrests as a result. And the criminals know that the police can't chase them, so that's a good thing. That's a good example of us doing our job in opposition. Mark Mitchell and myself have been talking about that now for months, about reviewing the pursuit policy. The other bit that we would have is a dedicated gang unit, like we've seen in New South Wales, which has been in place for 12 years and been very effective. That is really meaning that any time a gang member has any interaction or any offence, it's handled by a specialist unit. And then the third thing we've been talking about for some time, and as part of the 4 powers we want to see extended, is really these firearm prohibition orders, so that any gang member in the last 10 years who's been convicted of a serious offence, actually the police have warrantless search powers to go in and make sure that they don't have access to illegal guns in their cars or on their premises, which they don't have the powers to do that today. But that's a common sense power, because the problem we've got in New Zealand is that of illegal guns, and that's really what we've got to crack down on, and the gang's access to illegal guns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Mr. Luxon, as you have recently emphasized for a gang unit for police, can you please elaborate on that, please, for our listeners?
Well, what we mean by that is every time a gang member gets a traffic offence, it would get handed over to the gang unit, a dedicated gang unit. Every time that we actually have a gang pad that doesn't comply with the building code, it gets passed over to the gang unit. Obviously, that gang unit would be involved in a lot of cracking down and actually searching for illegal guns and gang pads and vehicles. And that's why I say the four powers are really significant and are very much linked to that, because the first one is we want to ban gang members from wearing their patches and their gang insignia in public. And that already occurs in government buildings. If you go to a school, a hospital or a court, you're not allowed to wear your gang patches or vests. And the reason is it's designed to intimidate people, but also to get one of those patches, you have to have committed typically a violent act and been very loyal to a gang. And so it's all about intimidation and making people fearful. And so where we've seen that being removed, say in Queensland, it's been highly successful. The second thing is that when gang members get together, and you'll often see hundreds of them coming together on the road or in a public park, We want the police to have powers to actually get them to leave an area immediately and disperse, but also not to associate with one another for up to 7 days on that dispersal notice being issued. And the third bit is really making sure that there's, when we've got known gang offenders, because many of the crimes being committed are well planned and well coordinated, and police often have intelligence and they often know who's involved in crimes, but they can't make interventions and stop people from associating with each other. And so we really want them to be able to do that so that the gang members won't be allowed to associate or communicate with one another for up to 3 years as a result. Those serious offenders, again, planning moves and planning crimes. So, and then, as I said, the firearm prohibition orders to stop the illegal guns would be good. So those are the things that you can do. And you give the police those powers, all of a sudden they've got a lot more weapons that they can use in terms of their fight against the gangs. And our goal here is very simple, is we've had enough and we're going to make life difficult for gangs, and we're not going to apologise for that.
Okay, that's a bit soothing for our listeners. But if coming to power, how do you plan to allocate funds for this innovation of having a gang unit when national policy is pressing for reduced government spending to tackle inflation monster?
Well, what we're talking about is we know that the government is spending a record amount of money, $127 billion. That is $51 billion more than it spent in 2017. We know that the government just signed up for 4 years of $9.5 billion, $38 billion over the next 4 years in this year's budget, and next year will be even more money. And in that, this government, who's hopeless at managing money, basically is confusing making spending announcements with actually getting outcomes and results. And as many of your listeners know, running a business, there's a big difference between spending money on an investment in the store and actually getting it to work for you so it generates a return or it generates an outcome. You've actually got to do some implementation, some delivery, some good execution. And so I can tell you now, within that big budget, the problem is the government isn't interrogating that money or that going through line by line and saying where are there savings to be made, because there's either dumb money being spent, as we've seen with a walking bridge across the Waitemata. There's wasteful money being spent, merging TVNZ and Radio New Zealand together for $330 million would be a good example. And then finally, there's a lot of money being spent, but we're actually not getting improved outcomes. And we're good with spending that money, but we need to get outcomes for it. We need to see improvements. Yeah, we need to be able to spend more money on police, but we need to get crimes down. At the moment, we've got 3,000 to 4,000 less prisoners, and the prison population's going down, but crime's going up. We don't mind prison populations going down if crime is going down, but it's not working today.
Sure. Mr. Luxon, we are now heading to our final segment of this discussion, in which you can assure and promise the retail business owners that how, if coming to power, you will bring business as usual for them. But here is a hot question for you. Mr. Luxon, if National comes to power, will you get rid of unrealistic income threshold to sponsor parents for permanent residency?
Are you sorry, was that a question around parental visas?
That's
I missed your question, sorry.
I can repeat the question. If National comes to power, will you get rid of unrealistic income threshold to sponsor parents for permanent residency?
Yeah, so if you, Erica Stanford, who's our minister, will be our spokesperson for immigration and ultimately our Minister of Immigration. Her and I have talked a lot about this in the sense of we know how important parental visas are for all communities, but particularly the Indian community. And we think there's ways in which we can actually have solve that problem really, and actually have people be able to have long run visas and multiple entries. And we, and Erica will make some announcements about that very shortly. And if you look at what's happened in Canada, and if you look at what's happening increasingly in Australia, but certainly Canada, there's a good pathway there for us to be able to, be able to have people be able to bring their parents here irrespective of their income level.
Okay, sure. So, Mr.
It's important, right? Because, the other day I was talking to a doctor and his wife, who's also a doctor, and they were in two different parts of Auckland. They've got a 3-year-old. They would love to have their parents come out from India to assist and help in a very stressful time and be able to stay for a few months. And and then make multiple trips here and back. We just need to make sure that it's not putting that actually there's ways through that, so that actually people who haven't lived here and paid their taxes are not consuming the resources that other taxpayers have paid for. But there's a way through that, as we've seen in Canada.
Sure. So, Mr. Luxon, it's always great to get your vision on all the problems this country is facing. So here we go, sir. Through the most favored radio of 990 AM, you, as a leader of the opposition, can now briefly make some fulfillable promises, if you want, for our listeners. If you coming to power in the next general elections, you can now address our listeners. Thank you.
Oh, look, no. I mean, all I'd really say, Uttam, is just that, I know how hard New Zealanders have worked coming to this country, and particularly the Indian community and broader South Asian community. I've watched, I represent botany, where 55% of members of botany are born overseas. And I've watched how people have come to New Zealand, left their family, their friends, their language, their culture behind. And they come here because they think this is a place that they can get ahead in and do well in. And I want this to be a place where it's welcome to immigrants and to New Zealanders, because you add a lot and you make New Zealand a much better place, a much richer place, not just economically, but also socially and culturally. So I've watched how hard you work as an inspiration, get that first job, that second job, that third job to get a deposit for a house or a business. And you need to know that we're the party of business and we're the party of immigrants. And we really want to make sure that this remains a country where if you want to do something in the community, you want to start a business, you want to raise a family, that you know that you can do well here. And that's really a big part of what a national government's all about, is creating opportunity for people and getting the government and the bureaucracy out of the way so that people in business can get on and do what they need to do, because they're the lifeblood of New Zealand is really what we've got to do. So there's a lot of things. Basically, people are fed up with this government. It's all spin, no delivery, and it's a lot of, and they just cannot get things done. And people want a government that will get things done for them, so they improve their daily lives and they can get on with what they want to get on to realising their version of the Kiwi dream. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us to deal with the challenges that we've got, and to also to realise the opportunities ahead. But we live in the best country on planet Earth, and we just got to make it much, much better, because we can be much, much better than this. Sure.
Mr. Luxon, we look forward to have more engagements with you, keeping in view the turmoil we have, and we, as you said, we are in the best country. Just a last 11th hour question, which came from our listeners, especially they are dairy shop owners. With the Porto Williams now replaced, can all the retailers expect more hope from new Minister for Police?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, Minister Hipkins' record in education hasn't been great. I mean, he's spent more money, he's hired more bureaucrats, and he's delivered worse attendance and achieved academic achievement outcomes. I really hope, for the sake of New Zealanders, that he can do better. But I tell you, the right answer is to vote National next year, and to make sure you make Mark Mitchell, who's a bravery awarded police officer for many, many years, because he will no doubt be the very, very best Minister of Police this country's ever seen. So that's the way to solve the problem, ultimately, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you so much for sparing your precious time with the listeners of Apna Radio 990 AM. And definitely, as said earlier, we will be in touch with your office to have your vision on your policies in future. Thank you so much, sir.
Always a pleasure to spend time with you at Radio Apna. Appreciate your time. Thanks to your listeners.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.